Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, bitte nehmen Sie Ihre Plätze ein, damit die Veranstaltung pünktlich beginnen kann. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats now so that we can start on time.
Herzlich willkommen zum Max Planck-Humboldt-Forschungspreis 2019. Also, very warm welcome to all of you who are joining via the live stream, via YouTube. Welcome to the Max Planck-Humboldt Research Award 2019. Heute sprechen wir über Entfaltungen. Wir sprechen über Entfaltungen von Menschen auf ihrem Lebensweg, wie sie ihre Talente entdecken, entfalten und warum das manchmal besonders gut gelingt und manchmal nicht so gut. Und wir sprechen über die Entfaltung der Potenziale von ganzen Volkswirtschaften und welche politischen Maßnahmen da manchmal eher hilfreich sind oder auch eher störend. Entfaltung, das ist das Metathema der beiden Preisträger heute Abend. Und von einem unserer beiden Gastgeber, wir haben ja zwei Gastgeber heute, werden wir gleich noch mehr erfahren, was uns erwartet und warum es so wichtig ist, dass wir heute gemeinsam diesen Preis, diese Preisträger, aber auch die grenzüberschreitende Forschung feiern. Unsere Gastgeber sind Professor Dr. Martin Stratmann, Präsident der Max-Planck-Gesellschaft, und Herr Professor Dr. Hans-Christian Pape, Präsident der Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung. Herr Professor Pape.
Humboldt Foundation, Professor Pape.
Ganz herzlichen Dank. Welch schöner Ort für Entfaltungen und auch für Begegnungen von Künsten in der Akademie und von Wissenschaften in einem Max-Planck-Humboldt-Preis. Sehr geehrter Herr Staatssekretär Meister, lieber Herr Stratmann, verehrte Preisträger, meine Damen und Herren, ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich namens der Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung und ich hoffe, ich darf das, Herr Stratmann, auch namens der Max-Planck-Gesellschaft hier zu unserem Festakt aus Anlass der Verleihung des Max-Planck-Humboldt-Forschungspreises und der Max-Planck-Humboldt-Medaille. Ganz herzlich willkommen hier in Berlin. Ein wirklich wunderbarer Ort für diese Preisverleihung. Und vor wenigen Wochen, das erinnern Sie alle, feierten wir in Kiel den 29. Jahrestag der deutschen Einheit. Die Fragen, die dort gestellt wurden, beschäftigen auch die beiden Wissenschaftler, die beiden Forscher, die heute geehrt werden. Sie fragen, wie steht es nach zurückliegenden 3 Jahrzehnten um die deutsche Einheit? Wie haben sich Ost und West angeglichen, wirtschaftlich, sozial, kulturell? Welche Unterschiede bestehen weiterhin? Und vor allem warum? Vor allem auch welchen Einfluss haben solche Unterschiede auf die Entwicklung, die ganz persönliche Entwicklung des Einzelnen und die Lebenshistorie des Individuums? Das sind Fragen nicht nur von höchster wissenschaftlicher, sondern von höchster politischer und auch gesellschaftlicher Relevanz. Und auf die müssen auch wir als Wissenschaft, das werden Sie alle so verstehen, Antworten geben können, ja, Antworten geben müssen. Und ich freue mich deshalb ganz außerordentlich, dass wir in diesem Jahr den Max-Planck-Humboldt-Forschungspreis erstmals auf dem Gebiet der Geistes- und der Sozialwissenschaften vergeben. Und ich freue mich deswegen insbesondere, dass wir mit
our medals for the
Ufo
first
und
time in the
Elliot Takadrop
humanities.
zwei Forscher
I'm
auszeichnen, von deren
delighted
Arbeit wir uns wichtige
to
Impulse
award these
für die
medals
öffentliche
to
und politische
two
Diskussion in
researchers,
dem
Ufo
Themenfeld, was ich
and Elliot
skizziert habe,
Takadrop,
erwarten dürfen.
in
Kurz zur
Takadrop
Vita,
in
Sie werden gleich noch mehr über unsere
works
Preisträger
that give
erfahren.
us
Ganz kurz zu
impulses
Beginn,
for
Professor Ufo
political
Akçigil
discussion
ist
in
von der
our
Universität
country.
Chicago,
Professor
ist ein international
Ufo
führender
Akçigil
Experte
is of
auf dem
the
Gebiet der modernen
University of Chicago. He's an
Wachstumstheorie.
internationally
Forscht
leading
zum
expert
Beispiel die
in
Zusammenhänge
growth
zwischen Innovation,
theory. He
Wirtschaftswachstum
researches
und
relationships
sozialer
between
Mobilität,
innovation,
aber auch
economic
das wahrscheinlich
growth
sehr
and
schwierige
social mobility,
Verhältnis,
but
zumindest
also the very
wissenschaftlich
difficult
schwierig zu
relationship
erfassende Verhältnis zwischen
between
Innovation und
innovation
sowas wie Glück.
and something
Als
like
Träger
luck.
des Max
As
Planck-Humboldt-Forschungspreises
winner of
2019
the
wird er
Max
in Deutschland mit
Planck-Humboldt
seinen
Research
Kolleginnen und
Prize
Kollegen am
Research Award
Leibniz-Institut für
2019,
Wirtschaftsforschung
he
in Halle
will
nach den
in Germany,
Ursachen
together
für
with
das
his
unterschiedliche
colleagues
Produktionswachstum
at the
und
Leibniz
verschiedene
Institute for
Lebensverhältnisse
Economic Research in Halle, research productivity growth in the under the different conditions in East and West. The Max Planck-Humboldt Medal will also go to Elliot Takadrop. He's Associate Professor at the University of Texas in Austin, and his contributions on development psychology and behavioral genetics give us precise analyses how biological, social, and cultural processes influence the development of individuals and how interactions between gene and society or environment, between nature and nurture, develop an individual in its way through life. Ladies and gentlemen, our Federal Chancellor Merkel said 4 weeks ago that freedom is the responsibility of the individual for individual decisions, responsibility for small and large decisions in life, and responsibility to look for one's own limits and then be able to live life without blaming others for such disappointments that are blamed on the state, on the elites, on politics, on the media, on science and the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that we as scientists are an out-of-touch elite. We shouldn't be that kind of elite. It is our job to create facts, arguments, impulses for the discussion in society, but also for political decisions. The German reunification, the German unity, and different situations in East and West, and the role of personal responsibility is only one example of many, but one example that is worth of our discussions on the basis of facts and arguments and ideas. I agree with Chancellor Merkel when she says freedom is the responsibility of the individual. But I ask myself, which influence does a society have on such decisions of the individual? We need our society to be socially agile, productive, and open. But we need critical questions, at least in a democratic society as is ours. We see different situations in East and West and the role of personal responsibility. So this is only one example. This is an example, though, that we have to fill with facts, arguments, and ideas. And as I said, I agree with Chancellor Merkel, freedom is responsibility of the individual for his or her own decisions. But I ask myself, which influence does society have on those decisions? How much innovation do countries need to be successful, to be socially agile, productive, and open? And which relationship between innovation and expertise, mobility and stability does a human being need? How much is genetics? How much is nurture? how much is family and how important are individual experiences as part of life, good as well as bad, and their interaction or the context of East or West. What makes our personality? How do we make our own decisions? What is luck in that context? Dear Ufuk Akicit, Professor Elliot Takadrob, we are excited and look forward to your answers on these questions. You will not just widen our horizon, but also expand the discussion in our society. You will show us new perspectives for ourselves, for our society, which is increasingly facing pressure from populism and the pressure that comes with that. We need your input. Ladies and gentlemen, State Secretary Meister, a good idea is often spontaneous, but for a good idea to become an excellent idea and excellent science, we often need the exchange and the debate with others. Successful and inspiring science is only possible through cooperation. Cooperation between researchers, institutions, in dialogue with society and in dialogue with funding agents. A cooperation as we see it in the Max Planck-Humboldt Award. The Ministry for Education and Research make this award possible. We thank you. We're very proud, and I would like to ask you on stage now.
Sehr geehrter Professor Pape,
Professor Pape, Professor Stratmann,
liebe Preisträger, Herr Professor
dear
Akicit,
award winners, Professor Akicit and Professor Takadrob, dear colleagues from the federal government, ladies and gentlemen,
eigenständige Akteure unseres Wissenschaftssystems
when
gemeinsam
two
eine Auszeichnung
actors of our research and science system come together and create an award, then it is something special. With the Max Planck-Humboldt Award, the Max Planck Society and Humboldt Foundation show their unique combined expertise in an international scientific cooperation. Additionally, in terms of flexibility, implementation and potential research, the Max Planck-Humboldt Research Award represents, from my point of view, an excellent and exciting formula. Such initiatives designed to go beyond traditional selection procedures and funding structures are of superior value for Germany as a location of science and are funded, and Professor Pape, we are happy to be part of this award. Such an award allows for excellent scientific cooperation that would otherwise not have been attempted or implemented, and of course we need cooperation of this kind more than ever. Only an internationally networked location for scientific research can be attractive for researchers. The competition for the best talent requires us to continually improve our system for scientific research. Ladies and gentlemen, international cooperation in the sciences is a must. The big topics and challenges of our time can only be mastered through international partnerships. Globalization, climate change and digitization are challenges for all of us and cannot be resolved individually. In times of rapid change, internationally networked science must be able to continue its cooperative work, even in projects where politicians need to talk has higher priority than successful cooperation. This only works, though, if scientists are given the freedom to do their work.
Professor
Pape, we celebrate this year not just the 250th anniversary of your namesake, Alexander von Humboldt. We also celebrate in Germany the 70th anniversary of our basic law. The fundamental rights enshrined therein are the basis for our free and respectful collective existence in freedom. Especially. You just said that freedom needs responsibility. But the freedom to do basic research is part of that and is guaranteed in Article 5 of our basic law. Creative research requires freedom and openness, and part of the freedom to do research is our conviction that free research does serve our society in the best possible manner. The Pact for Research and Innovation has long-term strategic objectives, and our federal government, as well as our regional governments, demand control in a global, not in a detailed sense. In June, I think this is a good idea. In June, we decided to continue this successful model with incrementally increasing funds. But the freedom to do research goes beyond financial matters. We have witnessed events in Germany which demonstrate clearly how valuable the freedom of science is for us all. And part of this freedom is being open for different opinions. Opinions like those of Professor Münkler from Berlin or of Professor Susanne Schröter from Frankfurt, and the vitriol they were facing when expressing their opinions. To be open for the opinions of others, to allow for controversies, and to argue on the basis of fact without defamation has been part of our understanding of ourselves as Europeans since the Renaissance. And this consensus, from my perspective, is our rock. And for that reason, we stand for research freedom on a European level and together with other member states. The freedom to do research is under pressure. I find that alarming. In some countries, there's not just discreditation of scientific researchers. People are being made redundant. People are arrested, right down to the attempt to close down entire institutions. And for that reason, for us as Ministry for Education and Research, we are happy that the communique of ministers at the Bologna conference in Paris clearly reiterated the values on which we base our freedom. Until the conference in Rome next year, a European task force will work on that topic. They will clarify and create a definition for the freedom of scientific research with indicators for that freedom in Europe, and to make sure that we don't ignore any misconduct in that area. But I also said freedom requires responsibility, and that goes for science. Science is part of our society. We were talking about fact-based research and results, and that is part of the trust we have in the sciences. I'm delighted today that we
von deren
Award,
innovativen und zukunftsweisenden
and we
Ideen
honor two
nicht nur die beteiligten
top
Wissenschaftler und
scientists.
Institutionen profitieren werden.
Not only
Beide
other
Forschungsthemen
researchers will
sind
profit from that
gesellschaftlich
innovation and
hochrelevant
their futuristic
und wir
ideas.
dürfen wichtige
Both
Impulse
topics
für
are
die öffentliche
very
und die
relevant,
politische
and
Diskussion
we can
Die
expect
komplexen
further impulse for the
Wechselwirkungen zwischen Genom
political
und
discussion
Umwelt,
in our society.
die Professor Tager-Dropp
There are complex interactions between
können
genome
Impulse
and
für die
environment.
Bildungs- und
Professor
Sozialpolitik geben.
Tager-Dropp researches those, and
Denn
they
sie
can
bereichern
give us
unseren
impulses
Diskurs
for
und
our
einen Beitrag zur
educational and social
Chancengleichheit und zum
policies.
sozialen
They
Ausgleich.
allow for social
Professor Akcigit wurde in Braunschweig geboren.
better social interaction, and
Sein eindrucksvoller Lebensweg
the other professor is Professor
hat ihn an die
Akcigit. He was
hochrenommierten
born in
Universität von
Braunschweig.
Chicago geführt.
He went to the
Und dank
University
seiner
of
Forschung
Chicago, and
werden wir über das
thanks to
wiedervereinigte
his
Deutschland, über uns
research,
selbst
we will,
lernen können.
I think, learn a lot about ourselves and our
Warum besteht die Kluft
reunified
zwischen Ost-
country.
und Westdeutschland weiterhin?
Why do we have that gap between
Lautet
East
einer
and West
seiner
Germany?
Leitfragen,
This is one of his guiding questions, and he will
nachgehen wird.
research
Einem
that
Ort,
question in Halle.
der zuletzt
And Halle is a
leider wegen eines
location
schrecklichen
that
Verbrechens
made the
in den
headlines
Schlagzeilen.
because of a horrible
Gleichwertige
crime
Lebensverhältnisse in ganz Deutschland
recently.
herzustellen,
To
Das
create
ist für die
equal
Bundesregierung
opportunities
seit der Wiedervereinigung
in the whole of
zentrales
Germany
politisches
is a
Ziel.
central political
Deshalb haben wir
target
den
and
Fokus
objective
auf die
of
Stärkung
our
von
government.
Bildung,
We want to
Forschung,
strengthen the focus on
Innovation in ganz Deutschland
education,
gelegt.
research and innovation
und damit
in
hoffentlich die
Germany
Grundlage
in
für
its
eine
entirety, and hopefully
Seit
creating a foundation
1990
for the
haben wir in den neuen
future.
Bundesländern
Since
63 Milliarden Euro
1990,
für die
we
Forschung investiert.
spent
Das
63
ist etwa ein
billion
Viertel
euros,
unserer
which
Gesamtaufwendung,
is
die
a
wir in dieser
quarter
Zeit für Forschung in
of
Deutschland
what
aufwenden.
we spend
Auch in
on
zukünftig
research
werden wir
and science.
strukturschwache
In the
Regionen in
future,
Deutschland
we
weiter
will
fördern.
fund structurally
Und
weak
wir wollen
regions in
außerdem
Germany,
regionale
but we also want
Innovationsbündnisse
to
unterstützen,
support
um auf
regional
diese Weise zugleich
alliances for
gesellschaftlichen
innovation
Zusammenhalt stärken.
and create better
Sehr
a
geehrter
better
Professor
strength
Akcigit,
for
sehr
the
geehrter Professor
for our
Tager-Dropp,
societies.
der
Professor
heutige Abend
Akcigit
gehört
and
Ihnen.
Professor Tager-Dropp, it is your
Es würde
evening.
mich sehr freuen,
Today I would be
wenn der
delighted
heutige Abend
if
Ausgangspunkt
tonight
für fortgesetzte
could be the
Kooperationen mit
start
Kollegen
for
in
continued
Deutschland
cooperation,
und für
could be
einen
the
Dialog
start of
mit der
continued cooperation in
Öffentlichkeit
Germany
würde.
and a dialogue with
Ich darf
our
Ihnen beiden jetzt schon
society.
ganz herzlich gratulieren.
I would like
Viel
to
Erfolg.
congratulate you both on your success and wish you every conceivable success for your future endeavors.
A big hand for Julia Bieler, Daniel Schwarzwald, and Maria Reich, who are the artists tonight, and that was the Rondo a Longarese from Joseph Haydn. But now we will move from the beauty of music to the beauty of silence and solitude. High time to meet the first winner of tonight, the first winner and the winner of the Max Planck-Humboldt Research Medal.
I really enjoy fishing. It allows me to get outside, have some solitude, thinking about something that is technical but also doesn't involve my work in any way. I am a psychologist, and my research investigates how and why people progress along different trajectories of psychological development across their lifespans. My research combines approaches from genetics and from environmental approaches in order to understand how genetic variation combines and interacts with social context. One primary project is the Texas Twin Project. It is a study of grade school twins that integrates data from biological samples and from psychological testing and social and environmental contexts. One approach that we've recently developed is an approach that we refer to as genomic structural equation modeling. And what this allows us to do is take large-scale data sets that have been collected on tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people and use it to combine information from different people measured on different outcomes in order to build cascade models of how these different outcomes relate to each other in a temporal sequence over the course of development. My core team here at UT involves graduate students and postdocs. And in addition, I have an international group of collaborators in Edinburgh, Scotland, and collaborators in Amsterdam and others in Berlin.
He really loves math and statistics, and he's really good at teaching it. And then he's also not bound to one research theory. Instead, I think he asks questions and tries to find the best data to answer that on. And if it doesn't support the theory, then that's what the data says, and he asks a different question. I really like working with Elliot. I think he just knows so much about the methodologies and theory that interests me.
What I really find rewarding is working together with my trainees and mentoring them as they make their own progress in their careers and their own scientific discoveries. Our research is allowing us to identify what matters when and through what mechanisms. And this can help us identify specific targets for policies and interventions to promote student learning and mitigate against psychiatric disease and dementia.
So, what fly fishing can do to a human being, it's amazing, right? To go from a fly over fish to a psychologist. This is a connection I've rarely, if ever, heard about. So, but that's not the topic that we will discuss. It's time for laudations and to really appreciate our awardees. Ladies and gentlemen, what impact do genes have on our development along our different life trajectories? And how important is the role played by other influences like the environment in which we live, our parents, friends and teachers, our social and cultural surroundings, our experience of great happiness or cataclysmic tragedy? These are the questions that you, Elliot Tucker-Drop, investigate. We have just watched this short video clip that gives us an idea that you're an excellent researcher, a good teacher, except being a good fly fisher. I can't get over this so easy. So, ladies and gentlemen, at some time or other, we have probably all asked ourselves which of our characteristics we have inherited and which we have acquired, be they physical, behavioral, temperamental. Scientists have identified the problem as nature versus nurture. Nature obviously describes the processes that are pre-wired in every individual of us, especially through endogenous factors such as genetic heredity. Nurture, on the other hand, is the influence of all external factors, the product of environmental exposure, life events, and yes, also of learning. And these influences are recorded in every individual of us over an entire lifespan, from the fertilization of the egg cell through to death. And this keyword, lifespan, is obviously of special relevance to Elliot Tucker-Drop's unique scientific concept. He works on the assumption that it is not enough just to record the complex interaction between nature and nurture, between genes and the environment, at certain selected moments in life. His studies consequently consider the impact of an entire lifespan, which delivers information on the critical events in a person's life, and consequently, he calls this strategy lifespan psychology. And to this end, Elliot Tucker-Drop, you're employing a whole repertoire, a whole spectrum of interdisciplinary methods on a longitudinal basis, from genes via hormones and the environment through to the psyche. And the results of this are obvious. A huge volume of data. We have just seen it in the video clip. And statistical analysis, I can appreciate that, is a challenge, not just because of the sheer amount and complexity of data, but also because of the objective, to identify general principles of the nature-nurture interplay and to decipher the specific ones in each individual one, providing the base for individualized therapeutic intervention as needed. Your research, roughly summarized in one sentence, I hope I do this right, shows that the course of our later development is set at an early stage. Social, cultural environment, family and friends, socio-economic conditions, poor or rich, access to education in childhood all have long-term consequences. Indeed, they are reflected in our organism, in our condition and constitution, in our neuronal structures. But how do individual people manage to become successful against all the odds? Why do some find it easier to tackle difficulties head-on and to swan through life without obvious hurdles, whilst others, even twins, break down under a burden of tasks, stress, and negative experiences? How can we explain vulnerability and resilience? These questions show how multifaceted and exciting your research field indeed is. They also show how relevant and important it is, both for science and society. Your strategy has gained you an outstanding international reputation. Your research results are published in the leading scientific journals. I've just looked it up. They form the basis for interdisciplinary review articles, and they find their way into textbooks on psychology and medicine, even those that are translated to German. And to cite just one example that I found particularly impressive, the editors of Science, one of the world's most distinguished interdisciplinary scientific journals, included your work in the 2011 list of the most important scientific studies. This is truly impressive and shows how important your work is. At the Center of Lifespan Psychology, which is part of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development here in Berlin, you have found the ideal location and the best partners for continuing to tackle these challenges, for analyzing the really huge volumes of data and for fine-tuning the methods. And one reviewer called it a dream team. Let's see what the dream team will bring about. Consequently, I'm not only curious what the results will be, I'm sure that the results will deepen and expand our understanding of the complex interplay between nature and nurture. Moreover, I anticipate your studies will deliver important arguments that will enable us to draw educational and socio-political inferences with regard to equal opportunities, early learning, and education. With this in mind, dear Elliot Tucker-Drop, we are all looking forward to your research as holder of the Max Planck-Humboldt Medal, and you're also now a member of the Humboldt family. Congratulations and welcome. We are proud of you.
Done. Grab one of the mics here, wherever you want to stand, left, right. Also, you've got this one here. Now, I have the impression you might have to fly Professor Papa over to Texas for some fly fishing. Would you be up for that? He's a fan. He's a. Already giving it and taking it back already. That's how it works. Now, Elliot, I know from our chat earlier, Berlin is almost home turf for you. How come?
I've certainly spent a good deal of time here. I think for shorter visits throughout, I was counting it. It looks like it's about 13 or 14 years. So when I was a PhD student at the University of Virginia, I was part of the International Max Planck Research School Life, which was a joint training program that included collaborations between the University of Virginia and the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. And I believe I was the first trainee to go on a cross-site exchange. So I visited Ullman Lindenberger's Center for Lifespan Psychology. Thinking back, I think it was 2017 that I spent the summer there.
All right, so Germany is not a foreign country for you anymore in a way. How would you describe in your own words, in one sentence, what's the big question you try to tackle with your research?
I suppose I already stole the words out of my mouth a bit in the video, but the overarching theme is individual variation in development across the lifespan. So I'm particularly interested in how people progress along different life trajectories of psychological development. And by psychological development, I mean academic achievement, cognitive development, cognitive aging, and also risk for psychiatric disease and late life dementia.
Let's take your life as an example. Now, if you go back to your first year at college, how many people would have guessed that you would become a renowned psychologist?
Well, I went into college thinking that I was going to become a mathematician. So I spent a lot of my high school years working in areas such as math and physics and chemistry. And when I went to college, I found myself becoming increasingly intrigued by psychological questions. And so to answer your question, probably people would have expected me to be a physical scientist of some sort or a mathematician. And in some respects, I've continued my interest in doing methodologically rigorous work and mathematically technical work until the present day. But what really, I think, converted me to psychology were some of my early research mentors. I took a class with Dick Neisser, who's a famous cognitive psychologist who had just finished chairing a task force trying to settle the nature-nurture question of intelligence, which they took a stab at, but they didn't quite settle. But I just found it absolutely intriguing, and I had been studying developmental psychology as part of some of my elective work, and I thought, how can we combine developmental psychology with this question of genes and environments?
What role may your father have played? He's a criminal psychologist, is that correct?
Oh, we would have to ask him. He's much more of a psychoanalyst than I am. But yeah, my dad is a criminal psychologist. He does a lot of work on expert evaluation of people who are standing trial or who are facing sentencing. And I found that work quite interesting. It was very much patient-oriented, and it was about evaluating individual people. I, at first, thought it wasn't for me, and in some respects, I ended up finding that my own twist on psychology, which was understanding not questions about individuals per se, but how individuals, as they aggregate or vary within a society and across development, differ from one another. I found that to be kind of more interesting questions for my own personal
rather than
growth.
Taking a snapshot, what happened at a time, what happens over a lifetime. Now, Professor Pape, you already brought it up. The big question always, what's more important? Nature, nurture. Luckily, now we have you to give us the answer, solve it once and for all. Which is it?
So the one kind of reorientation that I have been trying to convince others of, and which I've been doing a lot of empirical research to support, is this idea that it's not that nature and nurture compete with one another. In many respects, a lot of what we attribute to genetics, and in terms of a statistical association, it very much is associated with genetic differences between people. A lot of the core mechanisms that lead genes to become expressed involve intermediate environmental and experiential processes. So I have been particularly interested in how people seek out different environments that are commensurate with their own interests, and how those environments in turn feed back and result in long-term differences or effects on their outcomes. And because they have chosen those experiences by way of partly genetically influenced traits.
Let's maybe take the example of the musicians we saw, right?
Sure.
They all of them have talent, but it was important for them to be at a school where they could take a class and then have success moments, and that's where they interact.
That's absolutely the case. So, and I've actually done some work on musical achievements, and the old way of thinking about it is it practice that matters, or is it some sort of genetic aptitude or genetic talent? And what we found in some of our work, and I think it's very much a single example of a much more general process, is that it's neither but both. So individuals who are interested and perhaps do have an aptitude for music will only achieve professional levels of musical success if they're given the appropriate opportunities. And because one student who particularly has a partly innate interest in music, if she's given the appropriate opportunity, will go on to be successful, whereas another student who perhaps is interested in something else, maybe sports, will be given that opportunity but not take advantage for the sake of music. We would attribute that to a genetic difference, but the core mechanism is the musical training and the practice.
It gets super interesting when you get twins, so identical genetic setup or baseline, if you will. But we've seen twin studies in the modern times for more than 100 years. Even Hippocrates, 2,500 years back, looked at twins. Now, in 2019, what makes twin studies different? What brings it to another level?
So I think with the biological revolution and the Human Genome Project, what a lot of people thought is that we could replace twin studies, which are based on indirect inferences regarding how much individuals who are more genetically similar resemble one another in their outcomes. We could replace it, the thinking was, with direct genome-based methods. We could look at the individual base pairs of the genome and understand how those a direct read of the genome led to differences in people's outcomes.
So just so you see whether I understand, we do a full screen of my genome, then I see what happens over lifetime, and with big data, I need to crunch it, big computers, I can work out correlations. Is that the idea?
That was the thought, and that's what people do. But one thing that people have become very interested in, and has caused them to revisit these family-based studies, such as twin studies, is that genes are not randomly assigned. They are stratified across individuals and families. Families have different environmental experiences and cultural histories. And a key natural experiment is to ask whether individuals who inherit different genetic base pairs, because they're randomly sampling from their parents, so for instance, one sibling versus another sibling, whether they go on to have different life outcomes. And in some respects, we find that discoveries that we originally thought were attributable to gene sequence differences between people were really just picking up on differences across families in their cultural history. Now, by looking at differences within families, we can distill the extent to which we are really talking about inherited differences in base pairs that matter for outcomes, or something that's stratified across families and tends to run in families but is not actually attributable to the genetics.
All right. Now, what I also learned about you is you use a lot of different methods. So you observe the twins, you take a lot of data, you also use statistical methods. Some call you a polymath of methods. What methods are you combining in your work at the moment?
So I would say that an overarching theme is that I'm using statistical methods that are complex, but not too complex, just complex enough to answer the right question. But in terms of data, these methods, they come in very many flavors. In terms of data, we're combining methods from measuring molecular biology, such as genes, epigenetic signatures as well, so differences in the extent to which particular base pairs are turned on or off at the molecular level. We're also using hormonal samples that are taken at many different time scales. And then we're also combining it on the other side with sociological measures. And for instance, we take the twins in the Texas Twin Project, and we map their home addresses onto the U.S. Census, and we map their individual experiences and outcomes to macro level features of society and to aspects of their schools.
So in a way, you're at home in many different disciplines at the same time, and you combine them rather than sitting in one camp. Now, does that make your life as a researcher easier or harder?
Well, I suppose I don't need to conform to the dogma of a particular research emphasis or subdiscipline, and so perhaps what one combination might excite one subdiscipline, but perhaps be taken as offensive or against the kind of the dogma for another. And the beautiful thing is that if one subdiscipline that I'm combining doesn't like it, I can go to the other subdiscipline for peer review, and perhaps they'll find it innovative and exciting. So in some respects, it's an advantage. I get to interact with the people who appreciate my work, and they're not necessarily the same people for the different research outputs.
So it's a bit like when you have several party invitations on a single night, you can always choose where you're showing up. Right. Just teasing a bit. You also mentioned from your work, it is possible at times to draw policy interventions from them, recommendations for policy interventions. Which ones were the most surprising findings for yourself from your work?
So I would, as an empirical scientist, I always tend to be cautious in any sort of recommendation that I make. So I would say that the inferences that I'm drawing give us clues about the sorts of policies or interventions that we might wish to further invest our research and time in evaluating. So I would not take a basic finding from basic science and go out and suggest a change in educational policy or treatment. But that said, we found a number of interesting outcomes. So for instance, in early childhood education, one thing that we found is that there's been a lot of controversy as to whether or not children attending center-based preschools prior to kindergarten is good for them or bad for them. And whether or not perhaps it's particularly good for children from some backgrounds versus others. One thing that we've found is that the difference between rich and poor and between people who have very involved parents and those who have less involved parents is actually heightened when children are staying at home the year before kindergarten. But if they're attending a center-based daycare, what we find is that those differences are mitigated. So the children who are at highest risk look a lot more in their positive outcomes like those who are living in very wealthy environments.
And then since social factors are important, it probably matters in the US where that study was done. It might be hard to translate it to other countries and contexts.
So we've done so that particular study that I mentioned was done in a nationally representative sample of American preschool children, but we've done other work, that meta-analytic work, where we combine results across studies done in different countries, and we've looked at, for instance, whether or not the interaction between genetic variation and socioeconomic deprivation on cognitive development matters the same in the US versus, for instance, Western Europe. And in that meta-analysis, we actually found a very different set of results. We found that the socioeconomic gradient, so the difference in cognitive development between children living in the poorest circumstances versus the wealthiest circumstances, is particularly pronounced in the United States. But amongst children living in Western Europe, we saw much more equality in terms of that gradient. So genes were not interacting with social class factors to nearly the same extent in Western Europe. So we're back
at the interaction between nature and nurture. Now, we can't run experiments with our own life history, with our biography, but let's try to do it anyways. If you could go back to your first day at college and a long academic career in front of you, if you could change one thing, give younger Elliot one piece of advice, what change would you make?
Oh gosh, well, I'm standing here today, so there's not much that I could say that I should be changing with respect to my professional work. But I do think that it took me a long time to realize that I needed more things like fly fishing in my life. So I spent a long time working, I think, with a lot of focus on my career. And just about 3 years ago, I started thinking, what are some things that can make things in the long term more sustainable? How can I think about having a prosperous career that is also something that's sustainable personally?
Now, thank you for the keyword. This brings us to the main topic of the evening, which, of course, Professor Pape, is fly fishing. And just to finish off, I don't get it, yeah? Why don't you just use a bit of bait, a bit of meat, a bit of fish, and it's so much easier? Why not go the easy route, Elliot?
I took my kids fishing this summer, and I paid someone to take us out in a boat, and they actually dropped the bait in the water, and they didn't even give us the rod until the fish was on, and we reeled it, and the kids loved it. But I felt like I didn't earn it. I felt like I didn't master the technical bits that required me to trick the fish, and that it was just a matter of pulling in the fish rather than doing something that was challenging and that I needed to overcome. And the other thing is that fly fishing is difficult, and oftentimes fish don't bite, and it takes a long time to learn, and that gives me a lot of time to listen to the winds blowing and to think about things that are perhaps less exciting, but probably good for my soul.
Excellent. Elliot, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best. Congratulations. Grab a seat. And now, please, everybody on stage. Sorry, we still need you back here. And here is your medal presented by Professor Stratmann, Professor Pape, and Dr. Meister. Again, a big hand. Here is the medal. And guys, if you can to the front for the photo opportunity, if you can, all to the front, right into the front. And now we need the nicest smile that you're capable of. please grab a seat, and everybody else can get ready for another musical intervention. Right now, we are already well aware that it took these guys not just a fantastic genetic setup to be capable of these wonderful performances, but also a lot of interaction with the real world. Enjoy the next piece. Thank you very much. Thank you. And that was the Weird Salsa song. And if you wonder who composes such wonderful music, well, it's Daniel Schwarzwald, who was playing the piano. So he was also the composer. But now it's high time to meet the winner of the award of 2019. And all I can say now is we know he's not only a very fast thinker, but also a very fast runner.
When I want to relax, I go to Lake Michigan for a run. Seeing this silhouette of this gigantic city makes me realize how easy it is to get lost in daily life. And just stepping back for a second and looking from outside makes suddenly everything fall into places. And research is just like that. I'm interested in understanding the link between innovation, productivity, and economic growth, and also trying to study the design of optimal policies to bolster them. Why do some countries grow faster than others? Why do some citizens in certain countries are better off than others? When we talk about the performance of an economy, we typically report one single number, either income per capita or growth of the GDP of the country. However, that single number is coming from the interaction of millions of people and millions of firms in an everyday basis. So as a result, one needs to understand at the micro level how these individuals and firms are interacting and then aggregate this up so that we can come up with credible macro predictions. In the first part of my research, I try to understand the incentives of firms to invest in R&D and produce new technologies. In the second category, I try to study inventors and individuals. And in the third part, I try to study the technologies themselves. There's a lot that we can learn from history. And because of that, I go back in history and study patent records since 1836 all the way up to today. And that way, from millions of patent records, we can see how technologies and innovations are evolving for more than 150 years. And then I try to combine data with theory and computational techniques. Next question is, what kind of policies should we adopt? These are all very demanding tasks, and it requires a solid team effort.
I would say that Ufuk's main character traits are about both a strong interest in research, but also a strong interest in his students' development as researchers who understand the economic way of thinking.
I think that Ufuk is really passionate about his research, but he's also very dedicated, and that's what makes him go the extra mile, not only when it comes to research, but also when it comes to taking care of his students or participating in the life of the department.
He will always ask your opinion on things, which is great and not super common when you're a junior person, and it really makes you feel valued and intelligent, which is ultimately something that you don't always get in PhD life because everyone around you is so intelligent. And Ufuk always makes you feel like you belong there. So it's great working with Ufuk, yeah.
It's been almost 30 years since the reunification in Germany, but unfortunately, we do not see the full convergence in terms of economic indicators on the west and east side of Germany. In order to understand the underlying mechanism and reasons for the lack of convergence, we are going to systematically study the firms and individuals.
It's a very great honor to have somebody like Ufuk here. It is exciting and interesting to see how these types of people work, how they manage to be so productive as he is. We fit so well together because we have the right data, we have the right people that already work on similar issues, and hence we're able to provide him with the optimal environment. And he realized that, and that's why he chose the Halle Institute for his research.
In my career, I benefited a lot from interacting with brilliant people. And I'm going to do the same thing in Germany. I'm going to interact with brilliant minds in Germany. This is probably the part that I'm most excited about.
Ladies and gentlemen, mind the gap. We all know this famous advice from the London Underground. And indeed, mind the gap, it was also sort of the first headline that came to my mind when I learned about the research biography of you, Professor Ufuk Akçigit, and how you find your way into science. As a young PhD student already, Ufuk Akçigit paid attention to simple dissonance, a kind of gap. The gap that existed in practice between micro and macroeconomics. Specifically, how does innovation emerge on a micro level and then manifests itself in parameters of economic growth? Theoretically, There seem to be many elaborate explanations for the intertwining, but could this be proven by evidence? The data of the startup company down the street, the data of the medium-sized company that just increased or cut off funds for its creative freaks in the research and development department, the data of the patent offices. And did anyone ever try to connect such data to the census data in the past? If not, how can we claim to have valid theories that we expect politics to base its decisions upon? I think, ladies and gentlemen, you already can guess and imagine that Ufuk Achigit was concerned from the very beginning with the really big questions. In material science, my own field of research, you would call this scale-bridging questions. Questions that connect the macroscopic with the microscopic world. Or for economists, to make the connection from the individual all the way up to the macroeconomy. Now, this was around 13 years ago when Ufuk did his PhD at the MIT after having attained his bachelor degree from Koç University in Istanbul. Many of us know from our own experiences, the PhD sometimes looks like a practical training in what I would call expectation management. You start out big, you aim at a revolution, and then after some time, you have to cut your great visions and views into somewhat smaller projects and then stick to maybe a few of them for a long time. Fair enough. But Ufuk never got really afraid of his own big visions and questions, and he realized them, I have to say so, one after another. With enthusiasm, endurance, and creativity, he developed his own approach to economy. In his dissertation, he already broke with the traditional habit of the discipline, which is to evaluate innovations more by its frequent occurrence than by their quality. Now, using a fine-grained data set from individual companies and patent citations, Ufuk found out that smaller companies spend more on research and development, they create more radical, high-quality innovations, and they grow faster. He set up a structural model to explain the relationships between the various variables convincingly, and finally he showed to what extent welfare benefits when governmental subsidies to research and development are not given in a uniform manner, but rather linearly, depending on the company size, with the smallest companies getting the largest parts of their respective R&D investments being subsidized. In other words, in simple words, a policy by giving more research and development support to smaller rather than larger companies has a positive effect on the macroeconomic level. I find this a remarkable result, as we all know that larger companies in general may have a considerably larger impact on government decisions as their smaller competitors. In the 10 years to follow, Ufuk published really seminal papers at an astonishing pace on these and related subjects and topics. And as a consequence, Ufuk has received numerous awards and honors. And in fact, the largest bibliographic database in economics, which is called IDEAS, recently ranking among the top 3 economists worldwide of the cohort of 2009, that was the year when he finished his PhD. Now, after having held positions of the assistant and associate and tenured professorship in the Department of Economics at the University of Chicago, he is now, since July this year, full professor in this very same department, which is indeed one of the best addresses for economists in the world. Now, before we turn to Ufuk's planned research agenda here in Germany, I want to mention another impressive project he conducted in the past, and you have seen this in the short video before. We saw that Ufuk is not just interested in current, but also in historical data sets. In one major project, he matched the micro level and patent data of 220,000 inventors that were active between 1880 and 1940 in the US, with more than 600 million records of the US Census Bureau. And this allowed him to track the correlation not only between biographical and geographical data and the inventive activity, but also between patents and economic growth in an important area of American economic history. Now, in a similar way, he wants to examine movement patterns and biographical data of inventors here in Germany. He wants to do so in the future and match them with economic growth rates. And this is one out of 3 sub-projects that he intends to carry out in the framework of the Max Planck-Humboldt-Forschungspreis and in close collaboration, we heard this, with the Halle Institute for Economic Research. Tonight, we already heard about the second important project that UFOG wants to tackle in Halle, the productivity and income per capita difference between former West and East Germany. The Halle Institute is the only one of its kind that has access to the relevant micro-level data on individuals and companies at the time of reunification. With this material and the high level of expertise which is present in Halle, we will perhaps actually come closer to answering a question that moves us all, and not only in Germany. The East-West divide has shaped the continent for decades, and its sudden breakdown has led to economic, social, and political consequences which prevail to this day and which have a major impact on our lives. And indeed, in the third project that is based on large-scale simulations, UFOG and its colleagues are widening their focus, looking not only at Germany, but also at Europe. European markets are becoming less dynamic, various parameters are pointing downwards, and the productivity difference between the market leaders and smaller competitors is widening. Mind the gap. This warning signal is not only relevant for people using the London Underground, it is also relevant for us Europeans, and it forces us to actively make a big step ahead in order to overcome the gap for the benefit of all of us. For us Europeans, mind the gap should be replaced by close the gap, and the research done by UFOG and his team might help us in doing so. And in my view, the fact that the PI of this research work, UFOG, works and lives in the US gives this project a particularly high degree of objective quality. Dear Professor Ufuk Achigit, dear Professor Reint-Grob, we wish you every success with your collaborative projects. We all associate with it exciting insights and personal hopes. We are extremely pleased that you have found each other as a perfect tandem partners, and we are also particularly pleased that young scientists from Halle are teaming up with their colleagues, with young scientists from Chicago. This type of exchange is entirely in line with the spirit of the award, which also aims to support the research landscape in this country and which also aims to especially give the young generation a chance to collaborate with outstanding colleagues from abroad. Congratulations to all of you, and of course, especially to you, Ufuk Achigit. Ufuk, please come on the stage.
Ufuk, mind the gap, Now, you said in the film you want to interact with brilliant minds in Germany. If we speaking very, very strictly, one might say you technically are a brilliant mind from Germany because you were born here.
That's correct. I was born in Germany in 1980. My parents used to live in Germany. And when I was 5, they moved to Turkey. So my memories from Germany is from my kindergarten. And not always the fun ones. Germany and the German culture has always been part of the family, to be honest. I remember my dad used to always say, this is how it's been done in Germany, you have to do it this way, that way, type of, warnings. So we had the German discipline in the family.
All right, in your own words, in one sentence, what is the core question you're working on in your research?
So when we look around the globe, obviously we observe massive income differences across countries, and these income differences didn't occur overnight. Obviously, today's rich countries managed to grow for many, many subsequent years, and that's how they managed to become so rich. So then the question is, why did some countries grow faster than others? And from the literature, indeed, the Nobel Prize was given to Paul Romer for this argument. We know that in the long run, countries can grow differently only if they innovate more. So as a result, the question becomes, why do some countries innovate more than others? And this is exactly where my research comes in. So I try to really investigate in detail what are the sources of innovation, why do some countries innovate more than others, and I try to do my research in a systematic fashion by focusing on firms' incentives, because firms are investing in R&D at the end of the day, but the firms are also hiring brilliant minds, right? They are hiring the engineers, the inventors. Who are those engineers and who are those inventors?
So innovation truly matters. Now, to figure out what matters and what could be policy prescriptions again, it helps when you can try stuff out. So in many disciplines like chemistry or physics, they have their CERN or they have a chemistry lab. What's the equivalent of a laboratory for an economist?
Well, that's an excellent question. Obviously, we want to do some counterfactual policy experiments, and unfortunately, we don't have the labs in the physical sense.
So you would need 10 Germanys to try out 10 different
Exactly.
policy versions. Okay.
Or
we had 2 at some point.
Or alternatively, we can rely on economic theory. And that's exactly where the strength of economic theory comes in. And so my goal has been in my research to create a dialogue between empirical studies and theoretical studies. So if we can build a theoretical environment which mimics the German economy, where the firms in my model grow just like the German firms, for instance, or the individuals in my model behave just like the German entrepreneurs or inventors, now I have my laboratory. Now, in this world, I can do some policy experiments by...
So let me just to make sure I understand. It's a bit like in SimCity, the computer game.
Yes, exactly.
You build a computer model of, say, the economy of Germany. And once that runs in a stable fashion, you can play around with it. Exactly. 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, and see what happens.
Excellent. Yes, that's exactly how we are doing. By simply choosing the parameters of this model, of these equations, we try to mimic exactly the German firms and German individuals and entrepreneurs, so that when you simulate the model over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you can replicate what happened since the reunification, for instance. And that's exactly how we construct our own laboratory.
Yeah, the other bit, which is truly novel, you go really deep down. You don't just take headline figures, GDP, you go to the micro level. So what does that make you? Are you a microeconomist or are you a macroeconomist?
Probably a little bit of both. So I think one thing that I realized early on was that as a macroeconomist, if you just focus on one single number, you might be missing out a lot of interesting heterogeneity in the background. For instance, if you say that this country's GDP per capita is really high, does it mean that everybody in this economy is really well off? Or if an economy is really growing fast, does it mean that this is really a successful economy? Obviously, we have to go deeper and understand What happens to income inequality in the background? Do you give the equal chances to everybody in the society to express their creativity, or is the wealth really getting concentrated by a smaller and smaller group in the economy? Even though the GDP per capita might be growing fine, in the background, the inequality might be going up and up. In a dynamic sense, you might be digging a hole as an economy. So that's why starting from micro and looking at the individuals becomes important.
Okay, so I've learned two things. One, you have built a virtual laboratory for economics. Two, you've built a bridge between micro and macroeconomics. Let's look at results. Let's look at some maybe even policy prescription you now draw from running these repeated virtual experiments. You said Germany, 30 years after a unification, still has a wall. What do you mean, speaking as economist?
So using microdata from Germany, with colleagues from Halle, we created some heat maps. And our heat maps was produced based on, for instance, GDP per capita or income mobility. Today, you're in a certain position in the German income distribution. In 10 years, where are you going to be, for instance? Or when we look at the innovation per capita by looking at the patent per capita. Or, this is really, I think, one of the most stark findings that we found so far is, when you look at the innovation gap, there's a sizable gap between East and West. But when you even within the inventors or within the high-skilled people, when you look at the fraction of foreigners in that group, no matter which indicator you're looking at, you can draw the border between East and West Germany even today. So even though the physical wall is not there, still we see an economic wall based on these indicators.
So that heat map for now is descriptive, and the good news is you get 1.5 million euros to invest into more research. And in just a moment, we'll get one of your partners on stage, Professor Grob, and we'll talk about how you will perform research on Germany, on the economy. But let's look at policy prescription maybe from other parts of the world. For example, India, you look closely at that economy.
Right. So typically, the typical approach for an economy, a developing economy like India is, they are lacking money, so let's subsidize micro entrepreneurs so that they can grow and create jobs. But we did some detailed investigation, and indeed we found some very interesting results. So from the literature, we know that one of the strongest predictor of firm size has to be the success of your business or success of your technology that you produced. But one of the strongest predictor of firm size in India is the size of the family.
What?
Or
the size of the family?
To be more precise, it's the number of male children in India. So this is a finding from Nick Bloom and co-authors, and we took this fact and we looked at across regions in India, and what we find is that in those parts of India where the trust on police force or judicial system is stronger, the correlation between firm size and family size is weaker, which means that if you rely on the system, then you start delegating to non-family members and you start growing your business. So in an environment where you cannot rely on outside people, outside managers, if you cannot rely on the system, no matter how much R&D subsidy you're throwing at the firms, they're not going to grow.
So you put different versions of India through your model, and this is what dropped out. Trust is surprisingly the core variable. Now, what might be recommendations, policy recommendations from that?
So the immediate policy recommendation is, I think, the policymakers has to depart from this one-sided view. This problem is like a car with 4 broken tires. If you fix just one of them, it's not going to go. You have to really take an holistic approach. You have to take it as a whole and then approach the problem and fix each of these problems simultaneously. Otherwise, you'll be just wasting taxpayers' money or international money on some programs that's not going to really achieve the ultimate goal.
Which raises a lot of questions about programs we've seen over the last couple of decades from many international financial institutions. They might be looked at in a slightly harsher light once we use your modeling machine.
Exactly. So, I mean, through the lens of our analysis, we find quite some interesting policies which we typically think work beautifully. But when you look at the data, indeed, you don't see that.
So all these people that spend these billions to prop up some economies and others not, Now you come along with your machine. Do they love you or do they hate you?
We will see in the long run what happens. So I think I think we have to be patient, especially when we are talking about innovation. Innovation is not something that you can do overnight. That's typically the mistakes when we think about innovation. Let's throw money, and then suddenly next year we will start growing fast. But one has to go really to the bottom of this issue and understand where these innovations are really coming from. And one quick example that I want to give here is that, for instance, there's this common belief that R&D tax credit would work beautifully. You know, let's give R&D tax credit to firms so that they can innovate more. But when we look at the data, we don't see a strong evidence of R&D tax credit working out. Then, if at best it increases the wages of the scientists or engineers, what's the problem? Well, the problem is each of these innovations or patents are coming from educated people. They are typically coming from PhDs or master degrees, and they are fixed in supply today, right? So these are the people who are going to innovate. You cannot stop somebody on the street and suddenly ask him or her to innovate, right? They have to go through education. Education takes time. So they have to do PhD, they have to gain experience, they have to start innovating. It's at least 10 years. If you press the button today and implement a policy today, you have to be patient to see the return.
So we have a couple of parliamentarians here tonight. They might be taking notes. Okay, scrapping R&D tax credit. That might be one of the takeaways from
R&D tax credit has to be combined with education policy.
All right, perfect. Here we go. And long term. Now, I resonate very much with what Professor Straatman said. Mind the gap, because tonight I'll be flying back to London where I live. I'll read it on the platform of the Tube. And I live in a country that a couple of years ago threw the question to its own people, what should our fate be in the EU, out of the EU? Huge ramifications on the economic prospects of this country. Now you come along again and have a lot of data that your machine crunches. It comes up with insights. What should dictate economic policy? What should set economic policy? Insight from data or the will of the people?
So I think, again, it's a bit of both or a lot of both. So obviously, first, as a society, we have to set our objective functions, right? What is it that we want to maximize? And that's going to come from, of course, the people, right? They are going to decide what we want to maximize. Once we set the goal, from that point on, we have to turn to the data and we have to ask, what kind of policies can bring us to that point? And we have enormous amount of data, especially with the digital revolution. We have collected a ton of data. They used to be in hard copies. Now we are able to digitize these hard copies. And there are a lot of things from the past experiences that we can learn from. So as a result, bringing in more and more and more the past experiences and big data, then we can see better what would be the most efficient way of achieving this goal.
So lots of similarities also, if you think back to our conversation with Elliot, in both cases is both nature and nurture, and here micro and macro. Also, both of you did twin studies because you also work on the individual level, plus the question of unfolding. Same question to you, Ufuk. What helped you unfold over the course of your life, not just your academic life, to be the person you are now?
Right. Through my life, I traveled a lot to live. So first in Germany, then for 5 years in my parents' hometown, and then I went to a boarding school in Ankara for 7 years, and then I went to college in Istanbul, then to Boston, 5 years, Philadelphia, Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of traveling, and all these travels allowed me to interact with people. And everybody has a different experience. Everybody has something different to teach you. So as a result, I benefited a lot from interacting with people from different backgrounds. But this is just my own story. Then, motivated by this experience, we went to the data and asked, do inventors who interact more with others and who work more with wider range of inventors, are they becoming more productive? And the answer is very strongly yes.
So you are your own guinea pig. Is that fair to say?
Probably that's one way of putting it. So as a result, because this is about learning from others, right? Whatever we do, and just the way we spoke in the earlier session, it's about interacting, and as a result, the more you interact, the better you develop a vision. Sometimes it's not enough to know something, it's also about how to implement that idea, and sometimes you learn or think about new ideas, but sometimes you also learn how to implement those ideas, so that's why interaction is extremely key.
When we spoke over the phone, you said, oh, Andreas, I'm addicted to work. Why is that?
Life took me to where I am because I worked hard, but everybody in this room would agree with this experience, I think. Obviously, we don't know where we are going to be in 30 years, 40 years, but life comes in phases, right? First, we go to a primary school. We don't know which middle school we are going to go to. We have many different options, but if you work hard in primary school, you go to the best middle school. If you work hard, high school, college, etc. And through this experience, I learned that, you know, if you work hard, you always get to the best bin, and then it becomes an addiction. After so many years, I think hard work paid off, and that's what I'm enjoying right now.
In the name of science, keep going with it, but not to the point where you crumble, right? Okay, so just keep it below. Now, when you look at all the achievements in your life up until now, which is the one you're most proud of?
Two achievements, I would say. One of them is thanks to these a lot of interactions, I accumulated a lot of beautiful friends, which I very much rely on an everyday basis. So that's an extremely important achievement for me. And the second one, I think, is the group of students that I produced, I would say, both at the undergraduate level, thousands of students, and now at the PhD level. Now I have almost the 20th students who is going to graduate soon. And now they are going to the world and they are contributing to science, to our knowledge, and I couldn't be prouder when I see them deliver.
Okay. Now, we're adding to the list of issues to deal with, maybe even to the problems, because you're going to get €1.5 million to spend. Now, how to spend that wisely? One of the core questions, how do we use resources? And you're very lucky. You're very lucky because we have one person in the room who's going to be extremely helpful with that, and his name is Professor Reint Grob. Please on stage, Professor Grob. Oh. Hi. Good to have you. You can grab your microphone quite close to the mouth.
Now, I'm very good at spending money.
Perfect. That's good to know. Now, for the record, you're president of the Halle Institute for Economic Research and member of the Leibniz Association. And my understanding for the division of labor is you get the prize and you hand the money to Professor Grob, and he recycles it in the German economy.
Not quite. It is indeed the case that we get the money. That's just how the prize works. But then, of course, UFUG decides essentially how it's spent. We are just trying to help him navigate the German bureaucracy in what you can and what you cannot do. For example, when hiring people or spending money in certain ways. There's, as you know, in Germany, there are plenty of rules to follow, and we are trying to help him implement his prize money most efficiently.
So how do you plan to spend it?
Actually, UFUG should answer that, but I can answer for him here in this case, I think. So he's going to have a research group of 6 PhD students. We have advertised those positions already. And indeed, the advertisement closed a few days ago, I think. And the applicants are very impressive. We have to see whom we can hire. UFUG has already hired somebody who is already at the institute. So he's hired somebody for the team who is already working for the Halle Institute.
So economic research, as I explained, now we are trying to combine microdata with theory and computer simulations. So this is really an involved task. So we are talking about really millions of observations in the data. we are talking about general equilibrium model that takes a lot of effort to solve. Then we are putting this into computer. So this really requires a very solid team effort. So that's why I have a team of brilliant students in Chicago already, more than 10 students. And now we are going to replicate a similar system here in Halle. And so hopefully through also online interactions, online seminars, weekly seminars, this group will work as one single family and share their findings on a regular basis.
Okay. Now, Reind, I understand you recommended Ufuk for this prize.
No, that's not how it works. I mean, I did not recommend him for this prize. Philippe Aghion recommended him for the prize, a very famous economist. And then after being recommended for the prize, Ufuk had to essentially find a host. And he could have picked any university or institution in Germany, and he just decided to pick the institute. And that's how the connection arose. Now, we knew each other already. He had spent time at the institute, done research at the institute. He is in the scientific advisory board of a big network that we are coordinating in Europe on productivity. And so the choice, I think, was very natural for him. And of course, this is a very lucky break for the Institute to be able to work with somebody like him for such an extended period of time on this scale. So it's a big project.
Very good. Now, Ufuk, a personal question towards the end of our quick chat on stage. When you look back, you talked about your greatest achievements. What is the greatest regret you have in life?
Well, that's a tough one.
I can answer.
Well, obviously, I'm very grateful to what I've achieved, but unfortunately, that much work didn't leave enough time to invest in other activities. So I regret that I couldn't invest enough time into music and playing an instrument. But luckily, my cousin Joanna is a fabulous pianist who is with us tonight. So luckily, we have somebody in the family doing that. So I feel less bad.
Excellent. Well, since Joanna is here, do we want to hear her play later on? Yes? Okay. Good. You probably will have to spontaneously play the piano, and of course this was not rehearsed or planned in at all. All right, now, big hand again for Ufuk, and time to... Thank you so much. Right. And now it is time to hand the certificate to Ufuk. Please accept our apologies. We didn't bring the 1.5 million in cash today.
Ja, der Max Planck-Humboldt-Forschungspreis 2009.
The Max Planck-Humboldt Research Medal 2019 goes to Professor Ufuk Akicic and is awarded for outstanding scientific achievements in the field of humanities and social sciences. It's an award sponsored by the Ministry of Education and Research in Germany, handed over by Professor Stratmann, Professor Strate, and the Minister for Research and Education. Congratulations.
Grab a seat, and that brings us, well, we stay in the family, yeah, but it brings us to the cousin, to Joanna Goodell. And yeah, this piece is special in at least two ways. One, because it is played by a member of family from this year's winner of the award, but also two, because of the very properties of the piece. Joanne, she likes to combine things. She studied both anthropology and piano in Geneva and London. And in her own work, in her music, she combines classical music with Middle Eastern music. She just released a concept album called Bach in a Circle, and the piece she's presenting today is called Balkan Bach. Welcome on stage, Joanna.
thank you for applauding so much, and so I can offer you another piece. It's an arrangement of a Sufi song from Iran, and in Iran they have very big frame drums with a lot of metal pieces behind, and so. Yeah, okay. So to evoke this instrument from Iran, it's a big frame drum with a lot of metal pieces behind. I decided to put to my foot an ankle bell and to add a bit of percussion to the music piece.
Come up, one more time. Well done, Jonah. Very well deserved. And we know now that music respects no borders. But so does knowledge. It doesn't respect any borders either, geographical or mentally. And that we celebrated tonight as well. And by the way, the celebration isn't over. It's going into the second round. In a couple of moments, on behalf of our host, Professor Stratmann, Professor Pape, we'll invite you for a quick drink or two or more upstairs, 2 floors up, and we'll have a bit of food as well. I know it's Science Week, so we're all very busy and we might have other places to go to, but even if you can just stay for a moment, it's worthwhile, because I promise you, one of the best views of the Brandenburg Gate in the whole world, okay? If you're unhappy, you get your money back, okay? It's a free event, I know, but I promise. And before you go up, one more thing, take out your calendars in a moment, because you need to mark a date. The celebration tonight will come to a close after your drinks, but we'll celebrate again next year, and that is going to be the 4th of November 2020, and that will be for the first time the award in the category Life Sciences. And for now, thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the drinks upstairs. Have a great night. Thank you.